You want a good story? Well, you're in the right place to hear wholesome tales of wit, wisdom, and intrigue. Gather round for stories of inventors, entrepreneurs, entertainers, survivors, and the occasional villain. We'll travel through time and discover the people who've helped shape our world. You never know who you'll hear about or what you might learn. Everyone has a story. This is episode number 2, Wife of a President and Mother to Another. When President George H.W. Bush came to the end of a full life of 94 years, a funeral train passed through our town. The lead locomotive was beautifully painted with the familiar blue livery of Air Force One and bore the presidential seal. On this damp and chilly December day in 2018, thousands of neighbors lined the railroad tracks along the 70-mile route as locomotive number 4141 transported the family and remains of America's 41st president to a final resting place alongside his late wife, Barbara Bush. By all reports, George and Barbara had a sweet relationship. They'd been married for 73 years, the longest presidential marriage in American history. During her years as First Lady, she had a passion for reading, knowing how literacy translates into opportunity. Barbara had a rare claim also to have been both the wife and the mother of a United States president. And that reminded me of another story and some astonishing parallels between two women. In a small town in Massachusetts, a sickly girl and her two sisters sat in a huge library with the sweet, distinctive smell of old books filling their nostrils. Nothing compared with the smell of old books and parchment, their knowledge waiting to be shared with anyone who awakened their pages. The room was quiet, with only the sound of pages turning as each girl delved into her book. This was the best time of day for the frail girl, when she could just sit and get lost in her book without any disturbances. Their mother took it upon herself to ensure that her 3 daughters were homeschooled. Together, they studied English and French literature in the family library and had a tutor who introduced the girls to the world of philosophy, Shakespeare, Milton, and Pope. It was the tutor who introduced the delicate girl to his friend, a young lawyer. At only 15, she didn't appeal to him much at first. However, he came to realize his misjudgment about this girl, who turned out to be highly intelligent, witty, and fond of poetry and literature. She was well versed in history, law, government, theology, and languages. Most notably, she had a tidy fondness for writing letters. After 3 years of courtship, news of the betrothal was well received by the girl's father. He had thought his daughter would never marry, let alone turn out to be the keen, educated woman she had become. Her mother was less than pleased, but the girl could not be dissuaded from marrying the love of her life. She and the young lawyer shared important ideas about freedom and the future of this great country. From the early days of their marriage, her father had a sense that they were going places. The years had gone by like the blink of an eye. She reflected on her life, remembering their glory days and what it was like when they finally moved into the president's house. The almost First Lady already had an inkling that the press and political opponents would not go easy on her, an unpleasant prospect. Indeed, she confided in her friends that once she assumed her position as the most politically prominent woman in the country, she anticipated being vilified and verbally abused. She wasn't wrong in her prediction, but despite the critics, she made a strong impression on the press and the public. She was unafraid to answer those who criticized her, and when her husband and son were criticized, she courageously defended them as well. There was the time her husband's political opponent stood right in front of her. She looked into his eyes as they spoke, making no move to hide her contempt, as she declared that she just looked into the eyes of the devil himself. Pulling no punches, she later judged another opponent of her husband as sly, artful, and insidious. This First Lady was not going to fade into the background. Outspoken in private, she didn't always feel that she could freely speak her mind in public. Being accustomed to saying and writing as she thought, she struggled with the composure and civility that were required in a high-profile political role. She was outraged when private messages she had sent to her husband were leaked to the press, exposing political opinions that she never expected anyone else to see. Over time, though, she became less concerned about holding back her opinions in public. She was interested in politics, and her husband relied on her advice many times before, during, and after his presidency. Her involvement earned her the sarcastic nickname Mrs. President. War during her husband's presidency brought a certain degree of turmoil and national stress. Troops were called up to fight, and the country experienced economic hardships. The First Lady supported her husband's war efforts, even going so far as to travel to military bases and check on the troops. The effort was much appreciated, and she was flattered to have a squad named in her honor. She was also an activist for the oppressed, both in private and public, in her personal and political lives. This First Lady always let her core principles guide her. Aware of the successes and failures of the nation, she worked for its good throughout her husband's time in office. She had been the First Lady, and now a mother to a new President of the United States. She never had a vote, but in so many ways, the subtle ways of a wife and mother, her values influenced the course of history. The former First Lady looked back on her life in Washington. It seemed like she was constantly missing her husband. The responsibilities of his office took him away often. Despite his frequent absences, they shared their unbroken love through more than 1,000 letters. She poured her life, her heart, and her soul into those letters. There were hard times too. Side by side, they suffered the pain of the untimely death of their daughter after 3 years of infirmity that eventually claimed her life. Through 54 years of marriage, she and John went through so much together. And for nearly 200 years, they would hold the record as the longest marriage of a U.S. President and First Lady. Home in Massachusetts again, she hadn't been able to shake the cough, and the fever was worsening. On October 28, 1818, 2 weeks shy of her 74th birthday, Abigail Adams closed her eyes for the last time. And that's her story. Hey, thanks for spending a few good minutes with me. I'm Rodney Powell, and you're listening to the Everyone Has a Story podcast, a production of realmedia.us. If you like what you're hearing, how about sharing it with a few good friends? Better yet, share it with your kids. It'll give you something to talk about. And be sure to give a thumbs up on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. Add it to your favorites so you can catch this production every week in all its freshness. Lord willing, we'll get together for another good tale. No worries, we won't be running out of stories to share because everyone has a story.